and welcome to this episode of the Maryland Risk Management Education Podcast. My name is Paul Geringer, and I am the Extension Legal Specialist here in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Maryland. And today on the podcast, we are going to discuss and look at a recent court decision out of Texas, a Court of Appeals decision involving a poultry operation, actually two poultry operations, and discuss when right to farm laws do not apply. So, a Texas State Court of Appeals recently announced a decision on appeal. The court upheld a trial court's granting of a permanent injunction to neighbors to prevent two poultry farms from operating near their houses. And I'll put details to what the case name and where you can find the decision in the show notes. This case involves a nuisance claims and highlights when right to farm laws may not provide a defense to an agricultural operation. This will also, at the end, we'll talk about how Maryland's law would operate differently in a similar situation. This case is being appealed as we speak, so this will probably not be the final word in this ongoing situation, and we'll have to revisit it later once we get a state Supreme Court decision. So to give you a little bit of a background on this, operator purchased 231 acres in Henderson County, Texas in 2015 to use for a poultry operation that would contract with Sanderson Farms. After acquiring the property, the operator set up two LLCs for two different farms, which could operate poultry operations on the farmland site. In this case, he put one farm in the name of his son, and the other in the name of another relative. There were 300 feet separating the two farms. There were 16 barns that were split between the two properties, with each farm growing 444,800 birds. The two poultry farms were fully operating by November of 2016. Shortly after that time, neighbors began to notice an odor coming from the two barns, or the multiple barns, and filed complaints with the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality, or TCEQ. TCEQ began to investigate the complaints and issued notices of violations, or NOVs, to the farm's owners. So now, remember, we have two farms here. When the farm's issues remained unresolved after TCEQ involvement, the neighbors filed a lawsuit against the poultry farm owners and Sanderson Farms, the integrator, for who the operators were growing for. The neighbors brought several claims, including nuisance and trespass, against the poultry farms and Sanderson Farms. At trial, the jury found in favor of the neighbors, finding that the poultry farms and Sanderson Farms had created a nuisance and had reduced the fair market value of the neighbor's property. The judge awarded no monetary damages, but issued a permanent injunction against the poultry farms, operators, and the integrator that they could not operate any poultry farm within 5 miles of the neighbors and could not operate a poultry farm on the site in question. All of which was appealed to the Texas State Court of Appeals. So let's talk about the Court of Appeals. On appeal, the poultry farm owners and Sanderson Farms argued that the evidence was insufficient to support a nuisance finding. To refresh everyone's memory, a nuisance is a condition that substantially interferes with the use and enjoyment of another's property. In Texas, nuisances are divided into three classifications: negligent invasion of another's interest, intentional invasion of another's interest, or other conduct invading another's interest in the land because the invasion is abnormal or out of place for the surroundings. Expert testimony is not required to establish a nuisance, but can rely upon a general layperson's knowledge. So poultry production began in the first 8 buildings on the new poultry farms in June 2016. All 16 buildings, so we had 8 buildings per farm, were in use by November of 2016. According to the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality, TCEQ guidelines, the two farms would have twice the number of birds, likely to cause a nuisance and create odor issues on the property. The first neighbor called Sanderson Farms to complain about the odors in early October of 2016. Later that month, TCEQ sent out an investigator to document if the smells were a nuisance, and the investigator determined the poultry houses, not Sanderson Farms, were the source of the odors. As a result, the investigator issued an NOV, or notice of violation, to the poultry farms. TCEQ issued additional NOVs in February 2017 and June 2017, documenting 62 odor complaints by June 2017. Additionally, NOVs were issued later in 2017 and in 2018. Oddly, the court never highlights how the guidelines we discussed earlier related to the number of birds on a farm could be in relationship to these odor complaints being filed by the neighbors. That never comes up. The guidelines never come up. Additionally, the neighbors began to keep logs documenting odor events on their properties and outdoor activities that were prevented because of the odors. The odors often were intermittent rather than persistent because of variations in weather conditions. Finally, it is essential to note that all the neighbors owned their respective properties before the poultry farms moved in next door and could document what normal outside uses had been before the farms were established. Thus, the record confirmed that the existence of odors caused by the poultry farms constituted a nuisance. Next, the farm owners and Sanderson Farms continued that the trial court abused its discretion by entering a permanent injunction and argued the neighbors could have recovered monetary damages without an injunction. Generally, an injunction is available as a remedy when other remedies are inadequate. Typically, when a nuisance reoccurs, such as in this case, we have a nuisance occurring every time there are odors, monetary damages will be insufficient since it requires bringing future lawsuits each time the nuisance occurs. In this case, in the case of a reoccurring nuisance, the only adequate remedy is a permanent injunction. Thus, the court did not abuse its discretion when granting the permanent injunction against the farm owners in Sanderson Farms. The injunction also was expressly limited to the farm owners and Sanderson Farms to prevent them from operating a poultry farm within 5 miles of the neighbors. So, why do we care about this? Well, this case highlights when right to farm laws might not apply. As I have written before, right to farm laws vary from state to state, and how they operate will depend on the statute's wording. In this case, the Texas law applies only if the conditions or circumstances complained of as constituting the basis for a nuisance action have existed substantially unchanged since the date of the operation. Since the neighbors had been first in the area and then the poultry farms moved in, this created the change in the conditions. So the poultry farm didn't gain the right to farm defense. Maryland's law, if we look at it to kind of apply it in a similar situation, since we have poultry operations, we don't have that language. So if this had been in Maryland, the right to farm law probably would have applied and they would have went through the mediation process, not gone through court, and the defense would have been much better suited in Maryland's case, if this case had originated here and not Texas. Keep in mind that zoning in counties and zoning and planning requirements could provincially have prevented some of the conflicts that arose in this case. Other differences in Maryland's permitting process for a poultry farm would have gone through the Department of Environment that could have led to potentially different outcomes. So probably our processes in place before the poultry farms would have been established would have prevented the lawsuit we saw here. Finally, it's essential to know that they are still appealing this case, and that decision that we just talked about is not going to be the last word. The whatever appeal happens before the Texas Supreme Court would be. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that potential appeal. Thank you again for listening to this episode. If you have any questions, please email me or contact me at the contact info down below in the show notes. If you have any thoughts on future episodes, please let me know. Thank you again for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.